hi team, welcome to the last video, theme 5 then. So this video is going to cover key services, sand dunes, energy production and the Great Green Wall. Okay, so you can skip to whatever bit or you can watch the whole thing through, it's entirely up to you. But I just want to say again that well done everyone. So those are the 4 parts of this video then. Okay, so the first section of the video then, key services that the ecosystems provide. So all ecosystems, biomes in general, what key services means, the important things that they do for us, or wildlife, animals. So it's what they do that is important. What the biomes do that is important, that's they provide, that's the key services, okay? I mean, ultimately, what biomes provide for us, ultimately, is clean air from photosynthesis, they provide food, and they provide water, all of which we could naturally survive without, so therefore they are probably, it is really, really important that we protect them. So they're important because they provide us our clean air, our food, and our water. They also provide us all of our building materials, our timber, our metals, okay? So they provide our building materials. Now, so as well as building materials, they also provide flood control. Okay, so on coastal areas, for example, sand dunes are a natural coastal defence. But also trees intercept rainwater, so it takes longer to get to the river and flood. So they actually control flooding. Similarly, they prevent soil erosion because they shelter the soil from the precipitation and the wind. So they keep the soil in place and then we can grow crops and all the rest of it. There also might be medicine in the for example, in the tropical rainforest, they could provide medicines for us. Some cultures, it might be spirituality or leisure activities. Okay, you might go and visit the tropical rainforest. You might go on safari in the savanna grasslands. But ultimately, they, from the carbon cycle, they keep life on Earth. They actually take in carbon, give out oxygen, the trees do, but a lot of the ecosystems, the biomes, store carbon, which is the greenhouse gas, so they help us in that respect. So there's a bit of an overview of why ecosystems are important, the key services that they provide. Then, if we think about it in terms of our case studies then, in terms of the savanna grassland, now this isn't an extensive list, but what the savanna grassland does for us, it provides food, provides building materials, as we said. Not only that, but actually the wildlife attracts tourists, and then those tourists spend money. So the wildlife attracts tourists who spend money, which help LICs, NICs to develop. Okay, so that's just an example of some of the key services from the savanna grassland. Also, our small ecosystem, our small biome case study, sand dunes. As I said previously, they act as a natural coastal defence. Okay, so they naturally defend the coast against erosion, which is really, really helpful. Okay, so that's sand dunes. Also, in terms of the tropical rainforest, obviously there's loads for the tropical rainforest, but I mean, if you think about the nutrient cycle, you think about the creation of rain, air quality, and actually all of the wood, food, medicine, like the list is endless really for the tropical rainforest. Okay, so that's just some examples of the key services, which is the things that are important that ecosystems provide. Okay, so if you did get asked a question about a small-scale ecosystem, so if you got asked a question about a small-scale ecosystem, the ecosystem that we have looked at is sand dunes. Okay, so small-scale ecosystem, sand dunes. Oops, sorry. Now, first of all then, a sand dune is a build-up of sand. Build-up of sand. Okay, and it is stabilised, so pulled together, kept together by vegetation. Okay, so by grasses in the beginning. Right? Now it needs two things to develop. That's what it is. But to form, it needs two things. It needs a source of sand. So obviously, the sand's got to be coming from somewhere. The second thing it needs is an onshore wind. That means a wind that is blowing onto the land, because that wind that's blowing onto the land is going to carry the sand. Okay? Now, initially, once they've been carried on, there will be an object in the way. Okay? It might be, I don't know, a fence, a rock, a bit of seaweed, and that object stops the sand. So it stops the sand from being transported. The sand that was being carried by the waves is then stopped by the object. And that's what starts the build-up of the dunes, okay? So then you get your embryo dune, okay, like a baby, so embryo dune, a baby dune. So this is the start of the dunes. And that has got pioneer plants. What pioneer plants means is like first time plants, like the baby dune, the baby plants. It's the first plants to be in the area. Okay. Now, let's have a look. So, as the plants grow, their roots obviously grow, and the more their roots grow, the more they stabilise the dunes. So the dunes get bigger because the roots start to hold all of the sand together. Now this is really naughty, so don't do this, really, really naughty. But when I was a child, I lifted up the marram grass, so the grass that grows on the sand dunes. I grabbed a hold of a load of it, it's very bad, don't do this. And I pulled it up, and you literally, if you grab a clump of it, you can't pull it out because the root system is so complex that actually the whole area starts lifting. Never ever try that, but that's what I mean. The root systems are all tied together. So the dunes get bigger because the roots are stabilising them, so dunes get bigger. And also, while that's going on, the plants die, decompose, and the nutrients then are added. So it adds nutrients to the area, and then more plants grow because there's more nutrients. So that is called succession. So succession, the idea that the plants die, they decompose, and that passes the nutrients on, so then you get more plants growing. Okay? So after that then, try and leave that on there if I can, then you get your, oh I can't because of the lip on the book, sorry. After that you get your larger dunes developing, okay, you could call them foredunes or grey dunes, and they've got lots of vegetation now like marram grass, as I just discussed, okay. Eventually you get fixed dunes. So eventually you get fixed dunes or grey dunes, and these have stopped growing. Okay, there's lots of plants there now, and the dunes have actually stopped growing at this point. There we go. Okay, and you could, if you really wanted to stretch yourself, you could then say it's reached a climax community. It's reached a state of equilibrium. It's not growing anymore. It is a state where it is in equilibrium. It's not growing anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to borrow the WJC geography book to show you the image of this then. So remember, for the sand dune to form, so this is our small scale ecosystem, you need an onshore wind and you need sand. And what happens is when there's an obstacle in the way, like a rock or a fence or a bit of seaweed, you get a baby sand dune developing, an embryo dune. And then after that, you get a little bit more vegetation, you get a foredune. Okay? You can mention yellow dunes as well, but then you get to your grey dunes. Now your grey dunes are your stationary dunes. They're staying there, they've got lots of vegetation by this point. Okay, so it's basically going from a baby dune to a fixed dune, a fixed sand dune, where it's not moving anymore, it's vegetated, and it's a climax community. That's where it's going to stay. Okay, so the only other thing that we need to mention for our small ecosystem is that they're being destroyed. Like me as a child, never do that, but they're being destroyed for recreation. So what that means, you don't need to remember the word recreation, you can just say that they are being trampled on. People go walking through dunes and they walk all over them and they get destroyed. They also can be farmed, they're cleared for farming, they're cleared for building houses as well. There have been rabbits introduced to some sand dunes, and they burrow the whole way through them, and they basically dig them all up and destroy them. Now the way that those problems can be managed is they can put up signs, they can put up boardwalks, which are basically walkways that are wooden that go over the sand dunes, so they're lifted a little bit off the ground, and they so you're walking on the wood rather than on the sand dune. You can provide fences to keep people off, and actually you can encourage and plant grasses like marron grass to tie all the sand dunes together. Okay, so that's the sand dunes then, it's a small scale ecosystem. So number 3 in this video is energy production. It's actually from Gwynfor Moore, and I apologise because I'm definitely saying it wrong. But energy production is an example of how we use ecosystems. So you might think, oh, I already know that we use them for farming, we use them for logging, for furniture, and all the rest of it. So you might choose to not look at this in as much detail. But this is an example of how people use ecosystems, okay? So it's energy production at Gwynfor Moore. So if you remember then, how people use ecosystems, so we use, to create energy, to Gwynfor Moore. Now if you remember, it is off the coast of North Wales, and it is actually the second largest offshore wind farm in the world. So it's the second largest offshore wind farm in the world. In the world. If I fit that in the screen. Yes, almost. Okay, that's the main bit really, isn't it? It provides renewable energy, provides wind energy. If you do want to take it that far, it was opened in June 2015. And the biggest thing that it does is provide renewable energy. It is using the offshore area to create renewable wind energy. On top of that, it supplies energy to 400,000 houses, and it provides 100 jobs servicing the turbines. Okay, but ultimately it produces renewable energy. Now, if you did have to evaluate how humans use ecosystems, so if you had to say to what extent you agree or justify if it's good or bad, well, the negatives of this, it can harm migrating birds. Okay, wind farms can harm migrating birds. Also, some stakeholders view that it spoils the beauty of the coastline. So it spoils the views. And others may worry that it may put off tourists, which is one of their main sources of income. So there's a worry as well that the offshore energy may put off tourists. Okay, so this is an example of how people use ecosystems, what it is, the positives of it, what it creates, but also the negatives, just in case you had to evaluate. So the last section of this video is on the Great Green Wall. Now, the Great Green Wall is an example of a sustainable management of an ecosystem. So you might decide that you've already got enough knowledge on sustainable management of the savanna grassland and sustainable management of the tropical rainforest. So you might decide to just have a little tiny overview of the Great Green Wall. You might prioritise those sustainable managements instead. But it's here for you if you want to have a little overview of the Great Green Wall as a sustainable management of an ecosystem. Okay, so like I said, you might choose to actually just have a little tiny skim over the Great Green Wall, because you might have already done sustainable management of the tropical rainforest and savanna grassland, at which case if a question came up on sustainable management, you could already answer it without this. But just for a little overview then, the Great Green Wall, and again, this is going to be one of my classic drawings, this is. So, oh no, here is Africa. Clearly, oh blimey. So in 2010, 11 countries signed an agreement. They signed an agreement to plant the Great Green Wall across the width of Africa. So they did it south of the Sahara. Now this actually links to desertification, because they've done this to try and manage desertification. Okay, so that actually would be good for this case study. They've done it to try and manage desertification. Because, not an accurate map obviously, but if you think that the Sahara is here, right? Well, they planted this Great Green Wall here. So the 11 countries want to get together to plant the Green Wall to stop the desert from growing, because if the trees are there, the desert won't grow down anymore. So it's across the width of Africa, below the Sahara. And basically it's the local communities planting trees, and a positive of that is those trees are actually going to provide fruit, nuts, and essentially vital food that they otherwise may not have. They also have left little small fields in between the trees to allow for crops to be grown. And obviously the nutrient cycle will be richer because of the trees. Now ultimately they prevent desertification. They prevent soil erosion and desertification, and they create habitats, right? They're supposed to create habitats for wildlife as well. They create habitats. On the other side though, if we're weighing up, progress has been slow in 9 countries. You can understand why, because if you are a low-income country, you are going to prioritise other things than planting trees probably. 2 countries though have made progress, and actually that progress has led to more crops, has led to better fed animals, and actually the trees provide medicine and firewood. So actually there's been lots of positives for the countries. But that is an example of sustainable management of an ecosystem, the Great Green Wall. Well done for watching. Well done, team.